From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from New Hampshire.
From Bloomberg Studios in Manchester, New Hampshire, to our TV and radio audiences worldwide. Welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew.
We're down to 2, with just over 24 hours until the polls close for the New Hampshire Republican primary. Nikki Haley working hard to rally support in the face of a party that appears to be coalescing behind frontrunner Donald Trump.
Won 56,000 votes out of 3 million in Iowa. He got 1.5% of the vote in Iowa. America doesn't do coronations.
Donald Trump extending his lead over Haley in the daily Boston Globe Suffolk University poll, 57 to 38%. Trump and a few of his former challengers set to be on stage tonight here in New Hampshire. They'll be with Senator Tim Scott, Vivek Ramaswamy, and Doug Burgum. Familiar names, notably not present. Ron DeSantis, who of course dropped out of the race yesterday.
I am today suspending my campaign. I'm proud to have delivered on 100% of my promises, and I will not stop now.
This hour, we'll speak with Congressman Jim Clyburn of South Carolina, former Massachusetts Senator Scott Brown, and Andrew Smith from the University of New Hampshire Survey Center. So here we are, Joe, on the eve of a primary that was dubbed by Nikki Haley to be a two-person race before it actually was. Now it actually is.
Yep, that's right.
And there is a question as to whether the departure of Ron DeSantis is able to help Nikki Haley or just cements Trump as the victor in the second contest in this 2024 race.
Yeah, we're at a very interesting moment here. And a lot of new polls landed this morning. They, of course, were all taken while Ron DeSantis was still in the race. There were a lot of questions exactly what this field looks like in terms of polling, whether Nikki Haley can outperform with the help of independents, where those Ron DeSantis votes go, however few there may have been. And really interesting, Kaylee, we've talked about a lot of polls today. UNH. The University of New Hampshire, remember a week ago, had them in single digits. It's not the case anymore today.
Well, let's talk to someone from the University of New Hampshire. I'm pleased to say joining us now is Andrew Smith. He is director of the University of New Hampshire Survey Center. Thank you so much for joining us here in our studio in Manchester, live and on the scene. What is your baseline expectation, given all of the surveys and data you've seen, about how this is going to go tomorrow? Could New Hampshire actually deliver an upset?
Well, it could, but I doubt it. I think Nikki Haley wanting a two-person race was not really what she wanted. She really needed a four-person race. She needed Ron DeSantis and Vivek Ramaswamy to stay in this race because they were pulling votes from Donald Trump. So making this a two-person race, meaning those people who were Ramaswamy and DeSantis supporters, their second choice was always Donald Trump. And so what you've seen is their support moving over to Donald Trump and is expanding that lead that he already had over Nikki Haley.
Well, you put numbers on it here. The latest from UNH, you've been working with CNN, gives Trump 50, Haley 39. A week ago, Trump was at 39, Haley 32. Was that also because of the impact of the Iowa caucuses? People are trying to pick a winner, maybe seeing vulnerability in Nikki Haley coming in third? Or is it those Christie, DeSantis, well, now DeSantis, and of course Ramaswamy voters moving over?
It really was those other voters moving over, because Haley and Christie were essentially fishing for the same voters. Trump has got his voters, and Ramaswamy and DeSantis were in the middle looking for the voters who liked the Trump administration but didn't like the drama of Trump. As Trump has continued on and didn't seem to be being hurt by anything, they were going, why do I want diet Trump when I can get full strength Trump? And when Christie dropped out, his support went largely to Haley, and that's why her numbers came up. And when Ramaswamy dropped out, his support went largely to Trump, and that's why Trump's numbers bumped up. And DeSantis dropping out, I think, is going to go to Trump as well and increase that lead that Trump already had.
Of course, much of this will likely depend on turnout. As we saw in Iowa, turnout was incredibly low. And Joe actually had the chance to speak with the Secretary of State, Mr. Scanlon, earlier today. And this is what he had to say about how many people could show out tomorrow. Take a listen.
I fully expect that there's going to be a good turnout tomorrow, certainly on the Republican side. President Trump has a good solid base that turns out for him. And the undeclared voters in New Hampshire seem to be motivated to turn out for the Republican primary.
So he's expecting good turnout, 322,000. Is that the kind of number that could get Haley enough of the independent undeclared vote that she would need to actually carry this over the finish line?
It would be really hard for me to see that happen because, first off, undeclared voters turn out at lower rates than do registered Republicans or registered Democrats. They tend not to be as engaged in politics. And also, Haley is really depending on not just those undeclared voters who are really Republicans, but those ones who are maybe truly independent, but they're really Democrats. It's hard enough to get people to come out and vote in their own party's primary, let alone come out and vote in the opposite party's primary. So I think it'd be very challenging for her. Really important to remember that no candidate has ever won the New Hampshire primary without winning the plurality of their party's registered voters. Nobody's ever won on the backs of the independents in New Hampshire.
What's your gut on this turnout idea? A record? I've been walking around Manchester for a couple of days here, and it doesn't have the carnival atmosphere that you expect every 4 years. The networks didn't show up the way they always do. You didn't have a debate. How do you set a record in an environment like that?
I think it's going to be challenging, but the animosity towards Trump is strong, and those people who are voting for Haley are going to be people who largely don't like Trump on the Republican side. They'll show up. The Trump supporters are dying to vote for Trump. They'll show up as well. The question is the undeclareds. Are they going to show up or not? My sense is that they're not going to vote up in high numbers in the Democratic primary to write in Joe Biden. That's kind of not really talked about much at all. And it's going to be hard for them to go out and vote in the Republican primary. It could happen, but I just can't see them voting in the numbers that are needed to make up for Trump's advantage among registered Republicans.
Well, you mentioned the Democratic primary. We can't completely lose sight of the fact that that is also happening tomorrow. Even if President Biden himself is not on the ballot, there is a write-in campaign for him. But we just had Dean Phillips here with us in the studio, and he says he's going to surprise us in New Hampshire. Anything in your data suggest he will?
There's nothing really in my data, but I wouldn't be shocked. Biden is in the low 60s. And Dean Phillips is largely unknown and not particularly liked among Democrats in the state. The question is, can he get enough of those people to show up as a protest vote for Joe Biden? And I think for Biden, the big issue isn't so much if Dean Phillips can win or even do really well. It's going to be a question of what is a victory for Joe Biden? Does he win by enough? So if you look back to 1968, LBJ wins in 68 as a write-in candidate. But the size of his victory was determined not to be enough. The party's divided, he drops out. That's really the only scenario that I can see. And that determination of whether or not he wins by enough is going to be determined by the press, frankly.
Can I ask quickly, what's enough for Nikki Haley? We talked to Chris Sununu earlier. He's talking a strong second. He wouldn't quantify that for us, Haley. Could you? What would be a strong enough second to count?
I don't think there is a strong enough second to count. I think she has to win New Hampshire. If she doesn't win New Hampshire, she doesn't get the momentum that I think is necessary to go down to South Carolina to win in that state, which is still a Trump-leading state. It'll be extremely difficult to see a path for her to be able to continue on without winning New Hampshire.
That's something. I know the primary is real when we see Andrew Smith. Great to see you. And many thanks for joining us here. Our thanks to Andrew Smith, the University of New Hampshire Survey Center, here on Balance of Power. As we get things started on this eve of the primary, we'll be joined by Democratic Congressman Jim Clyburn of South Carolina with an eye beyond New Hampshire. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg.
Asked me for my advice. I told him I thought it was ill-advised, not well-timed. He got in on literally the very last day. And frankly, and I mean this kindly, I think it's unimpressive in terms of the campaign that he put together. As I said, I've been doing this for 50 years. I've seen what it takes.
That was New Hampshire Representative Annie Custer over the weekend talking with us about the candidacy of Dean Phillips for the Democratic nomination for president. Mr. Phillips spoke to Haley and I this afternoon.
Have you seen data, though, that suggests you would win? If this is all about data at the end of the day, what do you see?
My point, not at this stage, because nobody knows me yet. Maybe the nice blessing of not being well known is 2/3 of the country doesn't hate me yet.
Let's bring in Congressman Jim Clyburn now of South Carolina. Of course, someone who was pivotal in Joe Biden becoming the Democratic nominee when the path through South Carolina was so important. And you fast forward, Congressman, it's great to see you, to now this New Hampshire primary. And there are some Democrats who are pretty sore up here about what happened. The Dean Phillips candidacy is something that we'd like to ask you about, but I wonder just about here in New Hampshire, because of the changing order and the discord that took place with the DNC, would you support recognizing New Hampshire delegates at the convention when you get there?
Well, thank you very much for having me. I leave the rules and regulations for this up to the Rules Committee. Years ago, I went before that Rules Committee and made the case for South Carolina to be in the pre-primary window. We got there, and we were fourth. But, you know, I joke with people a lot that my favorite sport growing up was baseball. And we were in fourth place, and, you know, the best hitter in baseball is usually the cleanup hitter, and he's in the fourth place. So I said that, you know, I was pleased with fourth place. We were cleaning up stuff. But Joe Biden made the decision that South Carolina should go first. I support that. The Rules Committee looked at everything, agreed with that, and I think we should all play by the rules.
Well, Congressman Phillips certainly had thoughts about the decision for the president to skip over New Hampshire, but something else he told us, and it's something, Congressman, that he has said consistently, is that Biden is weak, he is unelectable, and that is dangerous if the goal is to keep Trump out of the White House in 2024. Is Biden a strong enough candidate when we see that he is losing support among key demographics, black voters included?
Well, I would say to Dean Phillips, as I've said to people over the years, people tend to, for some reason, misconstrue kindness for weakness. Joe Biden is a kind gentleman. Here in the South, we put a value on kindness and on being a gentleman. People who are bombastic may get a lot of headlines, but they don't get much headway. Joe Biden has made tremendous headway as president of these United States. If you look at his record with the Rescue Act, with the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS and Science Act, Inflation Reduction Act, the PACT Act, we have had more productive legislation coming out of this presidency than any Democrat since Lyndon Johnson's Great Society back in 1965. And that's a fact. So when you're of that...
But Congressman, what if...
I'm sorry?
But what if that fact is not resonating with black voters, with Hispanic voters, with young voters? These groups that helped propel him to the White House in 2020 don't necessarily seem to think he has been as successful as a president as the picture you're painting. So what needs to change here? How does he attract them back?
Well, we have to compete with misinformation, disinformation. We have a different world to operate in today than we had before. And we all know that. We know what happened to Hillary Clinton. We know what happened last year with all of the disinformation that took place. And that's what we are competing with. We're going to get there. We're doing better now, and I think we'll do better when we go 1-to-1 in the general election. Because I think Joe Biden is going to be our nominee with strong votes in this primary. And when we go to one with whomever comes out the Republican on the Republican side, and I think we are going to be successful in November.
Congressman Clyburn, we'll all get to South Carolina, but we're still in New Hampshire, and I wonder your thoughts on what's about to happen here tomorrow The conventional wisdom is Donald Trump is somehow easier to beat if it does end up being, as all seem to think, a Trump-Biden campaign, a rematch. Do you believe that as Nikki Haley tries for her last stand?
Well, you know, I don't tend to take anything lightly in a campaign. You've got to run through, as one of my daughters would say to me all the time, run through the table. We aren't here to determine who is the weakest or the strongest. We're here to put forth our record to the American people and make sure that we run through the tape. And that's what we're going to do. We aren't going to let up in any way. We aren't going to measure who may be the fastest or the best. We are going to run hard and run through the tape.
Well, Nikki Haley was your governor. Do you think she can beat Donald Trump?
Well, you know, I would hope that the Republican voters will recognize what threat Trump is to this democracy. And I don't think that Nikki Haley is that same threat. I don't think anybody on the Republican side, save maybe Ron DeSantis, he seemed to try to get to the right of Donald Trump. That's not what this country needs. You know, when I was studying history way back yonder, I remember Alexis de Tocqueville once saying, now some people say they didn't say it, he gets credit for having said, America is great because its people are good. And if the people of America ever cease to be good, America will cease to be great. That's what we are dealing with here. The goodness of this country and the greatness that flows from that. And we've had these candidates like Trump and DeSantis that seem to have lost basic goodness. And that, to me, is what the Republican voters ought to face up to. And they seem to not want to do that.
Congressman, when you listen to Nikki Haley, she says that it's not just about Biden, but about the vice president, that everyone should fear a President Kamala Harris. How should the Biden campaign be thinking about utilizing her, be thinking about pitching her as vice president just as much as him for president?
You know, when I saw that come from Nikki Haley, I was very, very disappointed because that's, to me, is a dog whistle. This is all about someone trying to instill fear in people. People who fear Kamala Harris. She is nobody to fear. She is a red-blooded American woman who has preparation that few women have, and she ought to be treated with dignity and respect. And I really feel that that is a source of basic, just not goodness.
All right, Congressman, thank you very much for joining us this evening. We appreciate your time. That is Democratic Congressman Jim Clyburn. Now, coming up, we'll continue to look ahead to the New Hampshire primary as it is the eve of it. Stick with us. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. It is the eve of the New Hampshire primary. Trump and Haley in, Ron DeSantis now out. So let's discuss this further with Bloomberg's Laura Davison and Jordan Fabian, who are here with us in our Manchester studio. So, Jordan, how much has the nature of this race changed in the last 24 hours with the departure of Ron DeSantis? Or is it kind of status quo because he wasn't much of a factor here?
He wasn't much of a factor here, but it has changed in the sense that this brings Trump one much bigger step closer to clinching the nomination. As your previous guest alluded to, this is a much more different dynamic than Nikki Haley was hoping for in New Hampshire. She has really not a lot of runway to beat Donald Trump. Polls show about a 10-point gap there. If she doesn't perform well here, that could be the end of the road for her, and we could be talking about Donald Trump sealing up the Republican nomination before Super Tuesday.
Can we talk for a moment, before we forget this all happened, about the demise of the DeSantis campaign? With over $100 million spent, what went wrong? Expectations were incredibly high for Ron DeSantis. He had a great story to tell, and he never connected with voters.
This is really going to be something that that political scientists are going to be studying in the courses for years to come. He had all this money, he had the polling numbers, he had seemingly the party behind him, but couldn't connect. He didn't have the retail politics down and didn't really have a team advising him. They sort of had this playbook. They were all from local Tallahassee, hadn't done a national campaign, and didn't really want to take advice from outsiders, and that was really what undid them at the end.
Well, and of course, a lot of this money was not with the campaign itself, but with Never Back Down, the PAC. How did his candidacy change the nature of how a PAC operates with a candidate in terms of, really providing the bulk of the resources?
We're going to see this new model going forward. Super PACs can raise unlimited sums of money, unlike campaigns that have, really low limits. So if you have this, very powerful super PAC that has all this money, you can just seemingly have more money in the bank. The problem is you can't legally coordinate, and that's where things went wrong for Ron DeSantis. If you had people at the super PAC who thought they were in charge, people at the campaign who thought they were in charge, led to a lot of infighting, and really just weeks after the campaign started, people weren't, were already mad at each other.
Incredible. It's pretty odd to see Ron DeSantis as a guest of his own super PAC on the bus tour, for instance. Some strange moments that came about here. Nikki Haley is talking about a strong second. That's how Chris Sununu, the governor, termed it to us here on Balance of Power. What does that actually look like? What does she need to accomplish tomorrow?
I mean, I think if we're making a golf analogy, she's got to lag it to like 3 feet. She's got to get it to like we're just making the putt.
Not the spread we're seeing in the polls.
No, not the spread we're seeing in the polls. She wants to get it into more of a sure thing territory. 10 points. It's sort of like what Ron DeSantis did in Iowa. He staked this entire run on Iowa. He underperformed, and now he's out. She is staking her entire run on New Hampshire. If she's finishing a distant second to Donald Trump here, the electorate doesn't look friendly to her down the road. Her home state of South Carolina, very conservative. The other states, the same thing. She could be very much done by the end of the day.
It's interesting to have Jordan compare this to golf, because there was a Republican strategist earlier today, Jim Merrill, who said she needs to be within a field goal. 3 points. It's still football season, guys,
we'll keep the sports analogies coming as best we can. Our thanks to Bloomberg's Jordan Fabian and Laura Davison, among Bloomberg's best covering this New Hampshire primary. Coming up, former Senator, former Ambassador Scott Brown will be with us. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I have not been in touch with the Associated Press. I would expect, as in prior elections, that results or declared outcomes of the election won't be made until after 8 o'clock, when all of the polls close.
That was New Hampshire's Secretary of State David Scanlon on Balance of Power Radio a bit earlier today. And we're joined now by the former Senator and former Ambassador Scott Brown. Yes, former Senator from Massachusetts, but now Scott Brown of New Hampshire. I have to get all of this right. Now chair as well of the Competitiveness Coalition. It's great to see you again. Welcome to Bloomberg. Thanks for having us back in the state. I feel like we should be in the backyard for a barbecue here, because that's what you did for all the candidates.
Yeah, we did it in 2016, and we did it again, obviously, this year. We had everybody except President Trump. We even had RFK Jr., where we had almost 2,000 people show up. Incredible. So it was really, it was a great service for all of New England, because we had people, obviously, from Maine, Vermont, Massachusetts, the whole New England region, and they were very, very well attended.
Well, I want to hear from you for a moment on the significance of this contest. It's very quiet in Manchester this time around. It feels a little different with the sense of inevitability in the air. There was no debate last week. It's just a bit different. But when I look at the union leader's endorsement of Nikki Haley, there's a line that stands out at the very end. New Hampshire can prove, the union leader writes, that the independent-minded voters of the Granite State will not be told the election is a done deal. Is this thing over or not?
Well, that's the question du jour. Obviously, Donald Trump would like it to be over, and I think a lot of people maybe around the country wish it was over. But New Hampshire is an independent state. People take their votes very seriously. The joke is, hey, you're going to vote for Nikki Haley? Well, I need to see her 5 or 6 more times. Right. And they literally expect you to go into each and every living room. Now, Nikki is a wonderful person, hardworking. She's done it the New Hampshire way, like John McCain did with the McCain Express. And it really mattered because he won. I think if she doesn't win or come within 2 or 3 points, it's probably inevitable because it's almost a little over a month to go to South Carolina, then thereafter, and it's going to be tough to catch up at that point.
So when you hear Governor Sununu, when you hear Nikki Haley herself suggesting that a strong second is enough, you are saying strong second is actually almost tied with Trump ultimately, 2 or 3 points.
Yeah, I don't think a second really matters at this point. I mean, President Trump is polling well all around the country. Whether you like him or not, there's a feeling out there. They look back comparing to what's happening now under Joe Biden. Gas was $1.82. There was no border issues. We were getting out of wars. Inflation was non-existent. Our kids could buy, homes. There's so many things that are upside down right now that the people who say, I don't think I'm going to vote for him, they're actually looking at him again because they look at their pocketbooks and wallets and say, I'm kind of done. And Joe Biden does not have a message to say that are you better off as you were under President Trump or not? Yes, they were. That's the problem, and he doesn't have an answer to that.
We talked to Governor Chris Sununu about that. I'm sure you're close to the governor, and he is no fan of Joe Biden. He made it clear to us that he'd vote for Donald Trump if it came down to it, even though he's clearly endorsed Nikki Haley. But here's what he also said about the Trump brand and the reason why he decided to endorse Nikki Haley. Let's listen.
Because of that Trump brand, we've lost in 2018 and 2020 and 2022. I'm so tired of losing, and I'm tired of losers, and I think we're just tired of that brand that just drags the rest of the Republican Party down, right? What's the point of scraping out a win in the presidency if you lose everything else, like he has time and time and time again?
It's also kind of a tough view there, Scott Brown. Are you sick of losing?
Well, listen, first of all, I think you need to get better candidates. I don't think it's President Trump's fault that the state reps and state senators in the House and in the local states won or lost. Yeah. I mean, you have to have good candidates who do their homework and go door to door and do it the right way. Is there a certain trend that people look at them all on one barrel? Sure. But I think that the good people stand out, like Governor DeSantis. He won. And quite frankly, that's why he was a little bit of a target, because he's the only one that won in that cycle. And as a result, he was hammered constantly by President Trump and the super PACs and everyone else who didn't like him.
Were you surprised by the timing of DeSantis dropping out of this race? He didn't even give New Hampshire a shot.
I kind of had a feeling. I've spoken to him. He's been over the House, for the barbecues and everything. You could tell after the strong Iowa finish, which was good. I had Haley coming in second, but then he went to South Carolina, skipped New Hampshire. He went all over. It was kind of disjointed, excuse me, a little bit. And I felt that was kind of the writing on the wall. They didn't know which way to go because they were kind of just like, oh my God, what are we doing? We're at 6% in New Hampshire. You don't get any delegates with 6%. So what is he going to do? Is he going to go for another almost month explaining to people why he did so poorly in New Hampshire? No, I think he made the right decision. He's only 45 years old. He absolutely is going to have another run. He's got 3 more years to rehabilitate himself. He's done a great job in Florida, and I wish him well.
He got a lot of flack for not connecting with people in retail politicking, the stuff you have to be good at in New Hampshire. I covered your race when you won that seat in Massachusetts. You were able to connect with people in a way it was about the personality. It was about who do you want to have a beer with. That's still part of politics, isn't it? Did he learn a tough lesson there?
Yeah, listen, he may just not be cut out for it. I love people. I love meeting people. I love having a beer with people. When I was the ambassador in New Zealand, we used to have these massive cookouts. I used to invite Kiwis to come over to sleep over the house so they could understand what American life is really like. That's who I am. He's not like that. Nikki Haley is doing better. She's doing that retail politics.
Do you have to be to win?
I don't know. You're asking me how I am. I just like people. I like doing things that no one else likes to do, and we'll see what happens.
Well, but to the point of you get to know people, you mentioned how Nikki Haley has been showing up. She has been doing that one-on-one voter connection. She went to the barbecue. Yeah. The former president did not. He hasn't, frankly, spent that much time here in New Hampshire aside from big rallies. It's a very different kind of campaigning. Has he broken the New Hampshire primary
well,
and the way it works?
Just picture this. If, and first of all, Nikki Haley wanted a one-on-one, so she's got it.
Yep.
And let's just say hypothetically she wins this one-on-one, then that veil around President Trump is definitely pierced. So people are going to say, whoa, is this the one who can take him down? Because he's never debated somebody one-on-one. This time last cycle, we had 8 to 9 people still in the race in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
I would love, and I think it's a disservice that he didn't participate in the debates, regardless of how far. He owes it to the American people to go one-on-one with Nikki Haley. I think it's very important, and I know a lot of people are not supporting him because of that. But he has a solid base of 34, 35% in New Hampshire and probably around the country.
Yeah.
And the question is, those independents, that 40%, and maybe those 3,500 Democrats are going to come out and send a message by voting for Nikki Haley. That's the question.
Well, that's really something. As you suggest, get them on a stage, have them debate. There seems to be this feel in the party that we want to get this over with. Tim Scott endorsing before New Hampshire and not South Carolina?
Yeah, well, how about Tim Scott?
Are you getting phone calls to make an endorsement to wrap this up?
How about Nikki Haley supporting and appointing Tim Scott as a senator and then going?
He wouldn't have gotten it.
Wow, I was a little surprised.
Your phone's been ringing.
Yeah, of course it has. But listen, I'm in a different position than I was back then. There are people, I think it's too late to endorse in New Hampshire. I felt my service was to provide the barbecues at my cost to people. And I think what other people are missing is, don't forget, RFK had 2,000 people at my house. 525 for Ramaswamy was the next closest.
No kidding.
He's got 200,000 volunteers. He's already on Utah. He said, and I've spoken to him many, many times, that he will have ballot access. So how does that, and then maybe the no labels are already on 13, and maybe Cornel West, how does that affect the election? Imagine Joe Biden and Trump get the popular vote, right? And then how are they going to get the electoral college votes? They don't get it, so then where does it go? It goes to the House.
So do you think the third-party candidacy question is an underappreciated risk at this point in the cycle?
Absolutely, yeah. I've seen the machine, the RFK machine. I've seen it. I mean, they're believers. Yeah, I think it's something that you really need to pay attention.
Will you endorse in the
20%. Yeah, listen, if it's, I'm going to support, like Governor Sununu, the Republican nominee.
I see.
But I like RFK Jr.
I can tell.
I'm being honest.
This is the real scoop in New Hampshire.
Yeah, well, we appreciate honesty always. Thank you so much for joining us.
Trouble, okay? Don't send me anything, okay?
We'll just have you back to talk more.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate your time. That is former Senator Scott Brown. Coming up, we'll have more conversation around the New Hampshire primary. We'll be joined by our political panel who are here with us in Manchester. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Trump has his numbers. He's effectively the incumbent, but his numbers have been really stagnant. Nikki's the one that's been surging. She had a very good showing in Iowa. Right now, I think she just has to show that she's building on that here. If she can win, that'd be amazing, right? It doesn't have to happen. Carry that kind of momentum into South Carolina, into her home state, with 3 or 4 weeks or something like that before the South Carolina primary even happens. And she obviously has a huge record of success running there. So no, I'm very hopeful that this momentum is going to continue to build as we get into Super Tuesday.
That was New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu, who spoke with us yesterday about the candidate he's endorsed, Nikki Haley, and the momentum he thinks she has. Joining us now, our political panel, Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University. So momentum is what it felt like, Rick, and yet you look at the latest polling, and the momentum seems like it's more in favor of the former president. We have had multiple guests join us, the former Senator Scott Brown, just now Andrew Smith from the University of New Hampshire, who suggested basically what Nikki Haley really needs is a win, that the strong second that Chris Sununu and even the candidate herself are talking about aren't going to cut it unless it's a margin of about 2 points. Can she pull that off tomorrow?
Yeah, so much of it is looking around the corner to South Carolina. I mean, Trump's got a stronghold in South Carolina, very popular there. And how do you break that up? You don't break that up with a close second. You break that up with a win in New Hampshire. So if you want to look to South Carolina and give yourself the best shot you've got, doesn't mean no shot at all if she doesn't win New Hampshire, but the best shot she's got, is to flip the script. When we won here in 2000 and 2008, our polling literally flipped. And we were 15 points behind before the New Hampshire win, and we were 5 points up after the New Hampshire win. So you can have huge swings in the South Carolina electorate based on polling here, based on the outcome in New Hampshire.
So she's banking on that very scenario, and that's a potentially tall order right now. We spoke with a few pollsters throughout the day today, Jeannie, and this is your line of work. They say, including the publisher of the New Hampshire Union Leader, that people in New Hampshire love messing with pollsters. They're frequently not telling the truth because they like the way this turns in the end. What should we think about the sample and the independent spirit of New Hampshire when we consider the idea of a surprise?
Yeah, I mean, New Hampshire loves surprises. John McCain, the two Clintons, we do know that. And of course, you know, people don't look kindly on pollsters, and we've seen that increasingly. It's very, very hard to poll with all the cell phones and everything else. That said, this would have to be a blunder by not just one or two, but all of the pollsters. Yeah. And, you know, I think one big difference between, say, a John McCain and a Nikki Haley is that a Nikki Haley, she's not giving an argument about message. And message candidates, they encourage people, they make them more enthusiastic to get out and vote for them. That was what John McCain did. What she's doing is making an electability argument in a general election. That's a lot harder. And we've seen that, speaking of the polls, reflected in her enthusiasm numbers, which are not nearly as high. So could there be a surprise? Absolutely. Could she hold it to 2 or 3? Yes. But it would have to be a perfect night for Nikki Haley for her to do that.
Well, on the point of enthusiasm, in one of the polls, I believe the Suffolk University poll that is running with the Boston Globe, Trump supporters, more than 90% of them said their vote was for Trump. A very small amount said it was against Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley's numbers don't look like that. About half of them say they're voting for her, and 39% of them say they're voting against Trump. So when we think about that kind of enthusiasm gap, what kind of turnout should we be expecting tomorrow, Jeannie? Knowing it was very low in Iowa, the weather was a lot worse there, as we all experienced, but could it be low here, too?
It could be. It's so fascinating because you guys talked to the Secretary of State. He's saying, you know, 233. AFP is saying 240. I've talked to other people who say this could be in almost half of that. I mean, it's all a game. We don't know. AFP incredibly organized. They've got a great ground game. Sununu is going to be able to help get the vote out. But to your point, it's you know, are they getting out for Nikki Haley? We don't see that reflected in the numbers. She's going to have to really run the table in southern and eastern Massachusetts in some of these areas where about 3/4 of the voters are going to be voting.
Were you surprised to hear the Secretary, David Scanlon, Rick, predict a record turnout in this sort of bizarre environment that we're in this year? I suspect that would benefit Nikki Haley, but do you see it happening?
Yeah, you know, you get tripped up by these turnout models, and, you know, he was talking about a record turnout, and of course, part of his rationale was there's nothing happening on the Democratic side. And he's right. So a lot of these independent voters who would normally, unaligned voters, normally go, maybe some on the Democratic side, some on the Republican side. We're the only game in town tonight. This is a Republican show, right? And so all those tend to want to play. And all of a sudden, unaligned voters, they can really make the difference. I mean, when you look at the same polls, whether it's Suffolk or UNH, Nikki Haley's winning with those voters. And if it ever got to the point where those voters make up at least an equal amount of Republican voters, then you've got a totally different dynamic. Nobody wins New Hampshire if they're winning in the polls in advance in New Hampshire in December. So that's why they call this the upset state, because there's always an upset and no one sees it coming. So I think this whole model idea, too, of the more people who turn out, the worse it is for Donald Trump, may be broken, too, because we've not yet seen that happen, right? We had a very small turnout, as you pointed out, in Iowa, and that turned out to be a great advantage for Donald Trump. In other words, the DeSantis machine didn't deliver even in a low turnout model. And so I think the key is to keep your eyes open, watch some of these counties tomorrow as they come in and reporting, and we'll get a really clear view early around 8 o'clock as to what this thing is going to look like.
Well, Nikki Haley certainly is trying to make her last-minute pitch. In fact, she's doing so with a big TV buy, a 3-minute ad is running. It's focusing on foreign policy specifically and features the mother of Otto Warmbier, who was a U.S. student who was incarcerated in North Korea, upon return in a coma, eventually died. That is what this ad is about. Donald Trump and his relationship with North Korea. Here is a little taste of it.
My son Otto was invited to North Korea on an organized tour. He was taken hostage, tortured, and murdered by the government of North Korea. I will tell you that Nikki didn't help me because it was her job. She did it as a mom, a friend, and a fighter who made my fight her own. That's why I'm here today, to tell you we need a leader in the White House who inspires us to become the best versions of ourselves.
So, Rick, Jeannie, a 3-minute ad, and it's focused not on the economy, not on the border. Things that we have seen are prominent in voters' minds, at least they were in Iowa. It's on foreign policy. Can that make a difference for her here, Jeannie?
I think it can, actually. We don't often say that people vote on foreign policy, but one of the things that distinguishes Nikki Haley from Donald Trump is that she has been very strong, very cogent and articulate on supporting Ukraine, on foreign policy, her expertise at the UN. And this is something that we've seen in the polling. Donald Trump, for all he likes to talk about being a strong person and a strong leader, he did not deliver in terms of American national security and making sure we have what we need to stay safe. He was president 4 years. She can raise that. And so I think this makes sense, but I think it may be a little bit too late at this point. Maybe, for her sake, maybe not, but that is, I think, a fear. It should have been done earlier.
What do you think of this play, Rick? You buy a big chunk of time like this, 3 minutes, while everybody's actually watching Netflix. We saw Mitt Romney buy a big chunk of time.
They're watching us,
here in New Hampshire.
Just for the record.
That's going to be later on tonight. We saw Barack Obama bought like a half an hour or something on the eve of his election, right? Is that money well spent?
Yeah, sometimes. She's trying to change the dynamic, right? I mean, like, part of the problem she's had is she hasn't had a big event yet. I mean, when you think about it, she never got a debate she wanted. All the big endorsements have been to Trump. And she's been sort of the byline. She's like, oh, yesterday she did this after we talk about Trump. So even today, we've been talking about Trump. Now it's her turn. And so a 3-minute ad grabs your attention. It'll force us to talk about it. And you don't really have time to accumulate eyeballs, right? You got to do something with a big splash. There's no more time left. This is the last night to watch. And so it's a constructive effort to try and grab the headline.
All this to say, we've been focused on the Republicans. There is technically a Democratic primary here as well. Joe Biden is not on the ballot, but someone is. Dean Phillips, the congressman, joined us earlier today to talk about how he intends to do this. Just take a listen.
I am running as a Democrat. I intend to stay a Democrat. If no labels were to run a Ramaswamy, a DeSantis, they could actually peel votes from Donald Trump. Now, do I think either of those men would do it? No, because they want to run for president next time. But that's the only way I think a no labels ticket could actually work. It will not be me, because I would do just the opposite.
So, Jeannie, he said any decision around a third-party candidacy or otherwise would be based on the data if he thought ultimately it would keep Trump out of the White House in 2024. Based on the data, what happens for him here tomorrow? What happens to his candidacy?
I think I'm so glad you raised it because it is so important. I think should Joe Biden, this is a long way off, if he ever was to lose the general election, this will be the moment if Dean Phillips does better than expected. Like if he gets a quarter or a third of the vote tomorrow, when Joe Biden stayed off of this ballot, I think we will point to that as a turning point in this election for Joe Biden. I think it was a mistake for him to stay off it. I understand you talked to Jim Clyburn, the reasons, but I think it was a mistake. He needs to be out there and fighting for every vote. He should have been in New Hampshire.
All right, Rick and Jeannie, hold your final thoughts because they'll be back with us for those. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. The New Hampshire primary is tomorrow, but technically voting begins just 6 hours from now. The first ones will be cast in Dixville Notch. Rick and Jeannie are back with us for final thoughts. Rick, it's legendary. We could get a call on that maybe sometime after midnight. How quickly are we going to know who won this whole thing?
I believe in Dixville Notch. I've been there. Yes. I've waited patiently for their vote, and I'm going to put my bank on whatever Dixville Notch says, the rest of the state will follow.
Wow.
Okay.
Rick Davis. All right. Does that mean an early call? Are we going to get an 8:01 for you name the candidate?
If we're following Dixville Knox, it might be, 12:01 this morning. Yeah, I think we're going to get it fairly early, but I hope it's not as early as Iowa. We debated this. I wasn't a fan of that. Let the people vote, and let's count
We talked to the Secretary of State today. He said he has not been in touch with AP. So we'll let you know what happens with that tomorrow. Rick Davis, Jeannie Shanzano, thank you. We'll meet you back here tomorrow on Balance of Power. With Kaylee Lines, I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.